My birth and divine purpose. My name is Samson, and my story does not begin like any other man's. I, Samson, was destined for something much greater from the moment I was born. I was not just another son of the Israelites, but God's chosen one, someone who was formed for a unique mission. But it all began with my mother, a barren woman who had no hope of being a mother. She was a humble woman, faithful to God, and that is why my arrival in the world was an act of faith and a miracle. In those days, the Philistines oppressed Israel, and the situation was desperate. Hope seemed to have disappeared, but it was then that God decided to intervene. An angel appeared before my mother and gave her a clear and direct message. You are going to have a son. But he was not just any son, but someone who would be consecrated to God from birth, someone who would be a Nazirite. That meant that he should not drink wine. He could not touch anything impure, nor cut his hair. It was a sacred vow, a commitment to God. My mother, speechless at such an announcement, accepted it with faith. Not only would he give me life, but I would also be part of a divine plan much greater than herself. The angel told her that I would be the one to free Israel from the Philistines. My purpose was sealed even before my first breath. At that moment, her life changed forever. She was not just expecting a child, she was expecting someone who, by the grace of God, would have supernatural strength. From the moment I was born, my mother cared for me with absolute devotion, knowing that my life had a destiny beyond the ordinary. As I grew, something inside me began to change. The strength that God had given me was something that I could not fully understand at first, but every time I overcame something that was impossible for others, I remembered the angel's words. My destiny as a Nazirite, as a liberator of my people, was taking shape step by step. It was not just strength that God had given me. It was a call to a mission that seemed unattainable for anyone. I would be a man of war, a judge for my people, and although I would often stray from the path, that mission was with me. No one fully understood the scope of my destiny, but I did know one thing. My life was marked by a purpose that only God could fully understand. The strength I felt in my arms was not mine. It was God's. And that power, although it would lead me to moments of glory, would also bring with it lessons I never imagined. My story was just beginning. And although many in Israel still did not know who I was, my life was already written in heaven. How could I know? Because faith in what God had promised was the only guide I had. And from that beginning were born all my days, all my achievements, and above all, my challenges. Because being chosen by God not only brings blessing, it also brings a burden, a responsibility that very few can understand. The test of the lion and the honey god's call on my life began to manifest in ways that even I couldn't understand at the time. Each day, as I grew older, I felt a greater force, a presence propelling me towards something I didn't yet know what it would be like. But the first great challenge, that test that would mark the beginning of my destiny as a man with divine strength, came in an unexpected way, an encounter with a lion. I remember that day as if it were yesterday. I was traveling alone toward Timnah, a place near where the Philistines lived, at a time when I hadn't yet faced my enemies, but I already felt that something great was about to happen. As I walked along the path without warning, a lion appeared in front of me. A ferocious roar, a beast that seemed as imposing as any army that could challenge me. What happened next was not normal. It was not an ordinary fight between a man and an animal. In that instant, something was unleashed within me, something greater than myself. The strength God had given me engulfed me like a torrent, and with my bare hands, with nothing but brute force, I destroyed the lion. I killed it right there, in the middle of nowhere, without anyone seeing me, just me and the beast's roar fading into the air. Shortly after, as I passed by the same place again, I came across something unexpected. The lion's body, now lying dead, had been invaded by a honeycomb. The curious thing was that in that honeycomb, I was able to find honey. The idea of touching something impure, like the carcass of a dead animal, should have repulsed me, but something compelled me to take the honey. I tasted it, and as I did, I felt a kind of wisdom invade me. Through that honey, which gave me life and energy, God was showing me something important. In my mind, this experience with the lion and the honey was much more than a simple adventure. It was a symbol, a hidden lesson from God. Just as I had defeated the lion, God would show me that I would have the strength to overcome any obstacle, even those that seemed impossible. However, He was also teaching me something crucial, that life is not only about strength, but also about wisdom, about understanding the divine purpose behind the trials we face. It was then that I understood that although my destiny was marked by physical strength, my true test lay in how to use that strength. Every battle, every victory, was not just a demonstration of power, but an opportunity to grow in wisdom and faith. From that moment on, I knew my life would be a series of challenges that would test both my strength and my character. And although I didn't fully understand it at the time, the lion not only represented a threat to be overcome, but a first step toward the great mission God had planned for me. My wedding and my wife's betrayal. The life of a man destined for great things, like myself, is filled with challenges beyond what anyone could imagine. And during that time, even in the midst of my strength and power, I also had to face the dilemmas of the heart. It all began with my marriage to a Philistine woman from Timnah. She was a beautiful woman, but beyond that, there was a plot in her heart that I couldn't see, one that would change my life forever. I remember that, even though my mother and father were opposed to the idea, I insisted on marrying her. There was something in her gaze that drew me, and even though I knew I was walking an uncertain path, I couldn't help but follow it. The fact that she was a Philistine, the people who oppressed Israel, didn't stop me. For me, love knew no boundaries. But I didn't know that love and destiny were intertwined in a much more complex way than I imagined. At my wedding, we celebrated with a grand banquet, and that's when my impulsive nature became evident. I felt the need to test my wits, and I posed a riddle to the guests, a puzzle born from an experience with the lion and the honey. My intention was to demonstrate my intelligence and skills in a challenging way. The riddle was simple but held a deep mystery. Out of what you eat comes what is sweet, I told the Philistines, hoping they would never be able to guess it. But instead of the healthy competition I had imagined, they began to pressure my wife to reveal the answer. And this is where I made my first big mistake. I trusted her too much. For days, my wife pestered me and begged me to tell her the answer. I loved her, and I thought she would understand, but she didn't understand that people's hearts don't always follow the logic of what one desires. Finally, I gave in and told her the answer. But what happened next left me heartbroken. She, in the end, betrayed my trust and revealed the answer to the Philistines, who, triumphant, solved the riddle. My anger knew no bounds. I not only felt humiliated, but also betrayed by someone I had considered close. People who had admired me for my strength now mocked me. But the worst of all wasn't the public humiliation, but the betrayal of the woman I had loved most at the time. From there, things got worse. My rage became an uncontrollable force, and I decided to seek revenge. The betrayal led me to an act that even I didn't fully understand. I killed 30 Philistine men to pay for what had happened. And although my revenge gave me some temporary relief, something inside me told me I was walking a dangerous path, one filled with impulsive decisions that would ultimately take me away from God's purpose for me. That episode in my life, my failed wedding and my wife's betrayal, marked a point of no return. From that moment on, people saw me as a man of strength, yes, but also of impetuosity and pain. And although the betrayal hurt me deeply, it also taught me something important. Trust and love should not be given to just anyone, and revenge, although satisfying at the moment, does not heal the heart. If you are enjoying this fascinating story, subscribe and like it. The Fox's Revenge and the Philistine's Wrath. After my wife's betrayal, something inside me changed. I could no longer trust people as before. Rage continued to burn in my chest, and although I knew my purpose was far greater than my personal desires, it was difficult to contain what I felt. The Philistines, those people who had oppressed Israel for so long, continued to mock me, and all I wanted was to make them feel the weight of my fury. My revenge was swift and, as always, impulsive. I decided that I would not only strike them down, but I would destroy everything they held dear. I knew their crops were vital to them, and that was when my idea began to take shape. The image of the foxes came to mind, and I immediately knew what I had to do. I captured 300 foxes, tied them up in pairs, and set their tails on fire. Then I released them into the Philistines' fields. The sight of those creatures running, flames blazing behind them, brought me a kind of bitter satisfaction. The crops that were their livelihood were destroyed. The Philistines, of course, didn't sit idly by. The anger my act of revenge provoked was immediate. The cycle of hatred between us seemed endless. Not only did they destroy the crops, but they also killed my ex-wife and her father in retaliation for what I had done. The pain returned to me with a vengeance, like a direct blow to the heart. But I couldn't stop. The fire of my fury, fueled by betrayal, continued to burn within me. My revenge wasn't over, and the consequences of my actions only made the spiral of hatred between the Philistines and me more and more dangerous. My desire for revenge became a personal war, and the battles kept piling up. Destruction and bloodshed became an essential part of my life, but despite the rage, something inside me was beginning to realize what I was missing. Impulsive actions and decisions made in anger were only taking me further away from my original purpose. I wasn't fulfilling God's plan for me. I was losing my way. My life, which at first seemed to be driven by the power of faith and divine strength, was now clouded by revenge and resentment. I didn't want to be the man who lived for revenge, but at that moment, I couldn't see any other way out. It was as if every action pushed me further into the abyss, and the deeper I sank into fury and pain, the further I drifted from my true purpose. But what I didn't yet know was that God had something greater in store for me. Although my heart was filled with anger, His plan for me hadn't changed. I was destined for something more, but I had to face my own demons before I could see the greatness God had in store. The Donkey Jawbone Massacre. My acts of vengeance against the Philistines only heightened tensions between us. My rage seemed to be an unstoppable force that stopped at nothing. However, that anger, although fueled by pain and resentment, also led me to moments where the divine force within me manifested itself in ways that still surprise me today. It was one of those occasions when my life took an unexpected turn and my destiny became even more intertwined with the will of God. I remember that day as if it were marked by divine fire. The Philistines, as expected, did not remain calm after my acts of vengeance. They decided to catch me and take revenge for everything I had caused them. An army of Philistines came after me with intentions to kill me. I was alone, surrounded by them, without weapons, without friends, without anyone to help me. I was facing certain death. But at that moment, something incredible happened. In my desperation, God gave me supernatural strength. I found a donkey's jawbone lying on the ground, and without a second thought, I took it into my hands. That jawbone, a simple object, became my only weapon. It was then that the strength of God took complete hold of me. As if it were an extension of my own will, the donkey's jawbone became an extension of my divine fury. With it, I began to strike the Philistines, one after another. The scene that unfolded was something the Philistines never forgot. collapsed. One after another they fell at my feet, defeated by a single hand. That jawbone, which seemed so insignificant, became the symbol of God's unstoppable strength. In the end, I had killed 1,000 Philistines with it. 1,000 men fell before the divine strength that God had placed in my hands, and I stood there, sweaty, exhausted, but completely invincible. But even though victory was mine, something inside me wondered, was this the way I was supposed to live? Was violence what defined me? After the battle, something strange happened. I felt not only victory, but also a deep need for water, a sense of weakness that I had never experienced before. At that moment, I realized that, as great as the strength God gave me was, I could not survive on it alone. The victory had not been mine alone. It was an act of divine mercy. God, in His infinite goodness, gave me water from a miraculous spring that appeared before me. I drank and regained my strength. It was as if He was reminding me that, even though strength had been given to me, I was still dependent on Him for every step, for every victory. My life depended not only on my physical strength, but on God's grace, on the trust that He would always be with me. That battle, that massacre, was not only a demonstration of my power, but a lesson in humility. Even though I was able to take down 1,000 men with just the jawbone of a donkey, I knew that without God's intervention, I would not have survived. In my life of war and revenge, this was one of the first times I felt God's hand guiding me, even though I did not yet fully understand the purpose of everything that was happening. My mistakes and weaknesses. After so many victories and moments of glory, I began to realize that the real battle was not in my external enemies, but in the internal struggles that were beginning to arise within me. My life, marked by physical strength, impulsive decisions, and revenge, was beginning to show cracks. Confidence in my own power, in my ability to face any challenge on my own, led me to make mistakes that would be crucial to my destiny. It was difficult to see my weaknesses when divine strength had accompanied me in so many battles, when I had defeated the Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey and shattered any enemy that came my way. I believed I was invincible, that my power and my achievements gave me the right to do whatever I wanted. But what I did not understand was that my strength did not come from myself, but from God. And without Him, I was nothing. My greatest weakness began to manifest itself through women. The attraction to Philistine women, who represented the forbidden, began to cloud my judgment. One of those women was Delilah, a woman who, despite her beauty and seduction, did not share the faith that had been my anchor, my strength. I gave myself to her so deeply that the warning from God that resonated in my heart began to fade. My desire to please her and to love impulsively led me to the most disastrous decision of my life, to reveal the secret of my strength. Delilah, like many before her, saw in me nothing more than an opportunity to be taken advantage of. The Philistines, who knew that I could only be defeated if my strength was stripped away, bribed Delilah to discover the mystery of my power. My love for her blinded me, and I trusted her sweet words, her feigned affection. It was then that, in a moment of weakness, I told her the secret of my strength. My hair, which was never to be cut, was the key to my power. I had forgotten the promise to be a Nazirite. I had forgotten my vow to God, and at that moment the weight of my mistakes fell on me like an anvil. Delilah, knowing my secret, called the Philistines, who came quickly to cut my hair while I slept, and when I woke up, I realized too late what I had lost. My strength, which had previously seemed unbreakable, vanished before my eyes. I had lost not only my physical power, but also my connection to God. I felt empty, aimless. It was a fall that affected not only my body, but also my spirit. My heart was filled with regret, but there was no turning back. What I didn't understand at the time was that this fall was not the end of my story, even though everything seemed to indicate otherwise. Through my weakness, God was beginning to work in ways I could not foresee. Sometimes the greatest falls in life show us the need for God in a way that moments of glory never could. The strength I had once believed was mine was no longer enough. I needed more than physical power. I needed restoration. I needed faith. I needed redemption. As I was taken prisoner, blinded and humiliated, I began to realize that my real weakness had not been my hair, but my lack of obedience, my pride, and my blind trust in my own power. The lesson was hard, but it was the only thing that could prepare me for what was to come next. My restoration, my last chance to redeem myself and fulfill the divine purpose that had been given to my life from the beginning. If you are enjoying this fascinating story, subscribe and like it. My capture and humiliation. Life takes unexpected turns, and after so many victories, I had reached what seemed like the end of my story. What was once a man full of power, strength, and determination now lay in darkness, blind, a prisoner, and completely humiliated. The Philistines had captured me and taken me to Gaza, where I was treated like a war trophy, a reminder of their victory over the strongest man in the world. The irony of my situation remained with me. Once, I had defeated thousands with my bare hands, destroyed their cities, and humiliated their warriors. But now, here I was, powerless, hopeless, dragged along like an animal, unable even to defend myself. My eyes, once opened to the vision of God's greatness and Israel's freedom, were empty, unable to see what lay before me. Being blinded wasn't just a physical humiliation, but a metaphor for what I had done with my life. I had closed my eyes to God's will, and as a result, had become blind in my soul. The Philistines celebrated my downfall. They made me turn a millstone, performing humiliating and cruel labor as if I were nothing more than a beast, condemned to work myself to death. The children and prisoners of war mocked me, constantly reminding me of what I had been and what I had lost. And as I turned the wheel, I felt smaller and smaller. My heart was broken, but at the same time, something was beginning to change inside me. Perhaps it was despair, or perhaps it was regret. But at that moment, something was awakening within me. God had not yet abandoned me. Although the days of glory seemed to be behind me, a glimmer of faith remained alive deep within me. I was alone, but not completely. In my captivity, something inside me began to awaken, and it was then that I remembered something vital, the promise I had made as a Nazirite. My vow to God hadn't been completely broken. Something still remained within me. My hair, though cut, was beginning to grow back. That was a sign for me, a small spark of hope. That hope, though small, gave me strength to withstand the humiliation. Although I was no longer the strong man I once was, deep within me, something of divine greatness still lived on. What I didn't know at the time was that this time of humiliation, of brokenness, of pain, was precisely what God needed to restore me. The greatest fall I had ever experienced in my life, the deepest humiliation and suffering, would be the training ground for the most glorious return I had ever imagined. Although my enemies celebrated, although darkness surrounded me, God still had a purpose for me. My story wasn't over, and restoration was closer than I thought. But first, I had to humble myself before Him, acknowledge my mistakes, and understand that my strength was never my own, but a divine gift. And even though I was now a broken man, I knew I could still be an instrument of His will, my repentance and the restoration of my strength. The days passed in the darkness of my captivity. Each day, as the millstone turned, humiliation gripped my soul. The Philistines laughed at me, calling me the man who overthrew our cities, and held me up as a mockery, a symbol of their victory. Despite everything, something was beginning to change inside me. I was no longer so focused on resentment and revenge. Instead, my heart was filled with deep regret. I knew I had failed, that my pride, my weakness, and my lack of obedience had led me to this fall. But at the same time, something inside me was beginning to change. Hope. Hope wasn't something that came easily to me after everything I had been through, but with each passing day, I clung to that tiny spark inside me. I began to remember God's promises, all He had done for me in the past. I remembered how He had given me strength when I needed it, how His hand had lifted me up after every defeat, how even when I walked away, He was still there, waiting for my return. And then, with that tiny spark of hope, I began to pray. I couldn't see, I couldn't do anything, but in my heart, I knew God still loved me. It was in that moment of humility and repentance that I realized the most important thing. My strength wasn't my own. It was a gift from God. I had lost everything, but that didn't mean I had lost the opportunity for redemption. My fall, my humiliation, had made me see the truth. Without God, I am nothing. It was then, in the midst of my brokenness, that I began to experience something profoundly transformative. My faith, though broken and wounded, began to heal. My heart, though repentant, began to be restored. And so, it was in the midst of darkness, in the lowest place I could be, that God began to restore my strength. My hair, which had been cut off, began to grow back. A symbol of restoration, a sign that, even though I had failed, I could still rise again. My physical power began to return little by little, and at the same time, my spirit grew stronger. I felt stronger, more aware of my purpose, more connected to God's plan for my life. I was no longer the same Samson who had destroyed the Philistines with arrogance and fury. Now I was a man who understood that only with humility and faith could I fulfill the purpose for which God had created me. What I didn't know was that soon my opportunity to redeem all that I had lost would arrive. In that moment of restoration, God was preparing me for my final and greatest victory, a victory that would not depend on my strength, but on His power. I was about to face my destiny, but this time I would do so with a heart full of faith and repentance. My final sacrifice. The destruction of the Temple of Dagon God had restored my strength, and although I knew that my purpose had not yet been achieved, something inside me felt that my destiny was near. I had prayed fervently, asking for the opportunity to take revenge on the Philistines, but more than revenge, I knew that there was something greater that I had to accomplish. My restoration was not to feed my ego or my thirst for justice, but to fulfill the divine plan that God had for my life. But this plan was not just a superficial victory, but a profound sacrifice. Once the Philistines realized that my strength had returned, they brought me before them to be their mockery at a party in honor of their god Dagon. They took me to the Temple of Dagon in Gaza, a place filled with worshippers of that false god. As they led me away, the crowd laughed at me, celebrating what they thought was my final defeat. They did not know that the man they had defeated, the man they believed to be completely stripped of his strength, was about to become an instrument of God's will. It was at that moment, when I was brought before the Philistines and their worshippers, that the strength of my faith was put to the test. I was placed between the pillars of the temple, and there, in that large, mocking space, I realized what I must do. My heart was filled with one last desire, to destroy the Philistines, not just as an act of vengeance, but as a sacrifice for the liberation of my people. It was no longer about me, my vengeance, my mistakes, or my downfall. It was about the people of Israel. It was about restoring justice. It was about fulfilling the purpose that God had established from the beginning. With all my strength, I took hold of the pillars of the temple, those great structures that supported the entire building, and with a prayer directed to God, I asked that He grant me one last time enough strength to destroy them. Lord God, remember me and strengthen me, I pray, this time, just this time, that I may take vengeance on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. It was an act of complete surrender, a sacrifice of my life for the salvation of my people. When my strength was unleashed, I pushed the columns and the temple began to collapse. Destruction was imminent. The Temple of Dagon, the house of arrogance and idolatry, collapsed, taking with it thousands of Philistines who were inside. The sound of the temple collapsing, the falling of the columns, the cry of the crowd. It was all part of the last mission that God had entrusted to me. What the Philistines did not know was that their victory had been short-lived. Not only had I destroyed their temple, but through my sacrifice I had managed to fulfill the divine will. The destruction of Dagon's temple was a demonstration that false gods had no power over the true God, and that in the end, God's glory would prevail. In that final moment, in the final act of my life, I fulfilled the divine purpose that had been set forth from the beginning of my birth. As the temple collapsed and life faded from my body, I felt a deep peace, as if everything was in its place. My sacrifice had been worth it. God's glory had been restored, and the people of Israel had been set free. Although my life ended there, my story was not in vain. Through my fall and my redemption, I was able to fulfill the purpose God had set forth for me, a purpose that only He could fully understand. The legacy of my life, reflections on my purpose and lessons learned. My life ended dramatically, with a sacrifice that changed the destiny of my people and brought down the Temple of Dagon. However, what surprised me most at the end of it all was that, in my fall and final sacrifice, my purpose was fulfilled in the most unexpected way. When I looked back on my life full of ups and downs, I realized that God's purpose for me was not just about my physical strength, nor about my personal success, but about something much deeper: redemption and obedience. Throughout my life, I had moments of great glory, but I also fell into the darkest depths of arrogance, disobedience, and pride. My story is not only one of strength, but also of weakness, of mistakes, and ultimately of restoration. Through my struggles and victories, I learned that true strength is not found in what one can do on one's own, but in one's relationship with God, and in the humility to recognize that He is in control of everything. What God showed me throughout my life is that He doesn't choose the perfect, those who have everything figured out, or those who have all the answers. He chooses the imperfect, those who are willing to learn from their falls and mistakes. My life was a testament to how even the biggest mistakes can be part of God's plan if one is willing to surrender to Him, repent, and allow Him to work through us. After everything I went through, I realized that my true legacy wasn't in the destruction of the Philistines or in my physical power. My legacy lay in the lessons I left behind: the importance of obedience, the value of humility, the need to recognize our weaknesses, and the truth that only in faith and in God's will can we find our true purpose. You may wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't revealed my secret to Delilah? What if I hadn't succumbed to my weaknesses? We may never know the answers, but what is certain is that my story, full of light and shadow, is a reminder that even in the worst of circumstances, God has the power to restore us and use our lives for something greater than ourselves. Did you know there are other stories in the Bible about people who, despite their failures and failings, become powerful instruments in God's hands? The story of Jonah, for example, shows how even running away from our calling is not enough to escape God's plan. My life was a reminder of that. No matter how far we stray or how many times we fall, there is always the opportunity to come back and be used for the good of others. The story of Samson is not just about a strong man, but about a man who learned through his mistakes that true strength comes from God. If you like this fascinating story, subscribe and like it, and may God bless you.